Imagine you're walking into a boxing gym. You got that smell of sweat and like old leather just hanging heavy in the air.
Oh, yeah, that very distinct smell.
Right. And you hear the skipping ropes hitting the floor, and someone points to the heavy bag in the corner and tells you that boxing is, well, at its core, simple.
Right, the old "it's just a few moves" routine.
Exactly. They tell you it's literally just 8 punches.
Yeah.
And if you can master those 8 basic movements, well, congratulations, you've conquered the sport.
Which is, a very seductive myth.
It really is. It sounds almost mathematical, right? Just punch A, B, C, you're good to go.
Yeah.
But uh, what if I told you that turning your wrist just 2 inches the wrong way is literally the difference between throwing a knockout punch and, I don't know, ending up in physical therapy for the rest of your life?
Yeah, we love to categorize things to give ourselves this false sense of mastery. I mean, reducing a complex combat sport to a neat little static checklist is just incredibly naive.
And today, we are completely dismantling that idea. Our source material for this deep dive comes from someone who knows the absolute, granular blood and sweat reality of the sport. We're talking about Arnaud van der Veer.
Yes, a really fascinating source for this.
Totally. For those who don't know, he's the inventor of the Ram boxing glove and co-owner of Force One in The Hague, which is actually one of the oldest martial arts specialty stores in the Netherlands. We are talking about a guy who has spent decades completely immersed in the physical and, well, theoretical mechanics of fighting.
Which gives him a rather unique vantage point, actually. When you read through his analysis, you realize pretty quickly that a punch is never just a physical act.
Right.
A single strike is, it's actually a living reflection of historical necessity. It's about evolving biomechanics and, surprisingly, sweeping societal changes outside the ring.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to truly understand why boxing is so much more than just, like, 8 simple punches, we have to go back in time and look at how the absolute most fundamental weapon in a boxer's arsenal evolved out of pure necessity. I'm talking about the jab.
Yeah, the absolute foundation of everything else.
Right. But the jab you see thrown, under the Vegas lights today is completely alien to the jab of 100 years ago.
It really is. I mean, if we look at the years before the Second World War, the prevailing technique was something called the English jab.
And looking at Arnaud's breakdown of this, it feels completely counterintuitive. He says it was a straight punch, but the thumb was pointing straight up toward the ceiling. Wait, pointing the thumb up?
Yes, straight up.
Because if I try to do that right now, it feels like I'm knocking on a heavy oak door. It doesn't feel like I'm trying to win a fight. It feels incredibly weak compared to, turning the fist over. Why would anyone punch like that?
Well, because the goal wasn't to deliver a single catastrophic blow. The movement for the English jab came entirely from extending the wrist and the shoulder.
Okay.
You are completely isolating the arm. There's no rotation of the hips, no driving off the back foot. By keeping the rest of the body relatively static, you just aren't transferring your mass into your opponent.
So you're purposely holding your body weight back.
Exactly. It's a high-speed strike, but it has incredibly low energy expenditure and consequently very low impact.
Wow.
Yeah, it's honestly more of a rapid-fire fencing foil than a sledgehammer.
Let's look at the math on why they needed that low energy expenditure, because this is where things get genuinely insane to me. An average fight back then wasn't capped at 12 rounds.
Not at all.
At 30 to 40 rounds. And some fights went up to 100 rounds. Hold on, let me calculate that. 3 minutes a round? Let's just take a 30-round fight.
That's a lot of minutes.
That's 90 minutes of active fighting. Plus, the 1-minute rests in between, you're in the ring for basically 2 hours. You are literally running a marathon, except while you're running, another human being is repeatedly punching you in the face. How does a human body simply not shut down?
Well, it comes down to a combination of that specific biomechanics and honestly the lifestyle of the era. Because the English jab was high speed but low impact, the fighters weren't absorbing the kind of devastating, brain-rattling, concussive force we see in modern heavyweight bouts.
Oh, I see.
You could survive getting hit 100 times because the energy behind each strike was just a fraction of what it is today.
But still, to have the cardiovascular engine for a 2-hour fight, and these guys weren't even full-time professional athletes.
Not even close. The vast majority were heavy manual laborers.
Right.
They were hauling cargo on the docks, swinging hammers, lifting iron for 10 to 12 hours a day before they ever stepped foot in a gym. That lifestyle forged this immense functional natural stamina that you simply cannot replicate on, like an elliptical machine.
Yeah, definitely not.
And remember the stakes they were fighting for daily wages or maybe some gambling money on the side?
And doing it without modern protective gear. Arnaud points out they rarely wore mouth guards and didn't even wear groin guards, which is terrifying. They were literally men of steel.
They really were.
But because of that low-impact technique, knockouts were incredibly rare. They'd suffer knockdowns, sure. The ref would start counting, and it was often less than 8 seconds back then. They'd catch their breath, stand back up, and just keep fighting.
Yeah, it was a technique perfectly adapted to its brutal environment, you know? Grueling duration, low stakes per punch, and absolute maximum endurance.
Here's where it gets really interesting. After World War II, the environment changes, and the sport undergoes this massive evolution. The English jab transforms into the American jab.
Right, a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah, the thumb isn't pointing up anymore. The hand turns completely horizontal, so the thumb is pointing sideways.
Which fundamentally alters the entire kinetic chain of the human body. When you turn that fist over, you can no longer just flick the arm from the shoulder.
So you have to involve the rest of the body.
Exactly. To deliver that punch properly, the American jab requires a chain of alignment that starts at the very bottom of your foot. You push off the floorboards, that energy travels straight up through your leg, forces your hips and torso to rotate violently, and all of that combined mass is channeled directly into your knuckles.
Man, so you are turning your entire body weight into a projectile.
You're changing the entire goal from scoring rapid points to inflicting severe structural damage. Everything is streamlined to achieve the maximum possible force.
Wow.
The impact is just exponential compared to the old English jab.
But, physics always demands a trade-off. You want maximum power. You have to pay the toll.
You do. If we connect this to the bigger picture, that heavy energy toll completely destroyed the traditional endurance structure of boxing.
I can imagine.
You simply cannot throw your entire body weight into every single punch, absorb the equal and opposite reaction of that force, and expect to fight for 100 rounds.
You can't even fight for 20. Arnaud's notes point out this amazing piece of historical irony. We always tend to look back and assume that capping modern fights at 15 rounds and, eventually 12 was this noble, safety-first medical intervention to protect the fighter's brains.
Right, that's the common belief.
But according to the history here, it was actually implemented because the paying audience was getting ripped off.
Yeah, the fans were revolting.
Right. The fighters were burning so much energy throwing these devastating American jabs that by the time they hit the 15th round, their gas tanks were completely empty. The fights got sloppy, ugly, and just boring.
Just two exhausted guys in a ring.
Exactly. You're paying good money for front row tickets, and by round 16, you're just watching two completely exhausted guys awkwardly hugging each other in the center of the ring. Promoters literally shortened the fights to give the public their money's worth of action.
And that specific decision birthed the modern era of power boxing. Infinite endurance was no longer the primary win condition. Explosive power was.
Makes sense.
And it's no coincidence that this is the exact moment in history when strength training was first introduced to the sport.
Wait, really? They didn't lift weights before that?
No, before this, lifting weights was actually considered detrimental. The belief was that it would make you too bulky and oxygen-hungry for a 2-hour fight, but for a shorter, explosive bout, you needed the muscle.
But of course, once people get a taste of power, they always try to hack the system for more, right? Trainers started looking at the American jab and thought, how can we squeeze even more juice out of this lemon? And that led to some incredibly dangerous biomechanical pitfalls, specifically something called the over-rotation jab.
Right. And, the theory behind it sounds plausible on paper.
Sure.
If the American jab turns the fist horizontal, the over-rotation jab just keeps turning it. You twist the fist 30 to 45 degrees past horizontal, pointing the thumb diagonally down.
Ouch.
The idea is that forcing the fist to over-rotate mechanically forces the shoulder and the hip to turn even further into the punch, generating, a bit more velocity.
Yeah, I was trying to physically mimic this while reading, and it feels terrible. The analogy that comes to mind is wringing out a wet towel. You twist it to get the water out, but if you keep twisting and twisting past a certain point, it feels like the fibers are just going to snap under the tension.
Let's look at the actual joint mechanics of that towel analogy because it's spot on.
Okay.
When you wring that towel to its limit, you're locking the fibers together until they absolutely cannot move. When you over-rotate your fist 45 degrees past horizontal, you are mechanically locking your shoulder and elbow joints. They have zero give.
Wow.
So when your fist suddenly hits a solid object like a skull or a heavy bag, the kinetic energy has nowhere to dissipate.
Because the shock wave can't travel naturally through the arm.
Exactly. It stops dead at the joints. The joint absorbs 100% of the shock. You're effectively hammering your own ligaments.
That sounds brutal.
It is. Injuries aren't just a risk here. They are a mathematical certainty of human anatomy. Anyone throwing this punch regularly is guaranteed to develop chronic wrist, elbow, and shoulder degradation.
And Arnaud makes such a vital point here.
Yeah.
Boxing relies entirely on continuity. Like, it takes years to develop real fight IQ. You cannot improve if you are constantly sitting on the sidelines rehabilitating snapped tendons just because you wanted a 5% increase in punching power.
Exactly. It's a terrible trade-off.
Now, if you want a safer tactical alternative to just constantly driving forward, Arnaud introduces the stop jab.
Which requires a completely different mindset. Instead of driving your mass into the opponent, you are actually moving backward, retreating while you throw it.
Right. And obviously, moving away from the target means it's not going to be a concussive knockout blow.
No, definitely not.
But Arnaud says it's brilliant for when your opponent gets overly aggressive and lets their guard drop just a fraction too much as they rush in. You just pop them as you fade back. It's entirely tactical.
And that tactical approach provides the perfect bridge to perhaps the most important question for anyone practicing the sport. If maximizing power inevitably leads to exhaustion and chronic injury, how do you actually survive a lifetime in boxing?
Right. You need a massive philosophical shift. You have to stop fighting and start practicing the sweet science. Arnaud shares a very personal journey about this, actually. He spent over 30 years basically just learning how to brawl.
Yeah, that's the culture.
He was training with guys like Hoojband and Howard, and in that environment, raw, brutal effectiveness mattered way more than refined technique.
And brawling works remarkably well when you are young, highly resilient, and just overflowing with explosive athleticism. But, as we all find out, brawling ages terribly.
Arnaud admits it himself, like as you get older, brawling becomes totally pointless. Your body simply cannot recover from the damage anymore. His epiphany actually came when he started training with Chris Van Veen, who approached the sport as a pure technical boxer. For 30 years, Arnaud had viewed every single sparring session as a fight to the death. You step in the ring, it's a war.
But Chris introduced a profound psychological reframing. Sparring isn't a death match, it's a game.
A game, yeah.
It's a physical dialogue, a puzzle.
Which brings up a staggering statistic from the source material that genuinely made me pause. Globally, more than 95% of people who box do it purely recreationally.
Oh, easily.
Less than 5% will ever step into a ring for a real sanctioned competition. So I have to ask, why on earth are 95% of us training with the brutal, brain-rattling intensity of the 5%? If you're doing this for fitness on a Tuesday night, why are you trying to take someone's head off?
It's a profound misalignment of goals, honestly. If your objective is recreation, stress relief, and physical longevity, the focus shouldn't be on concussive power. What's fascinating here is how that realization shifts the entire focus of your training away from your fists and down to your feet.
Footwork. Arnaud says if you want to master the game, you train footwork daily. But it doesn't have to be this grim, grueling, rocky montage where you're running up snowy mountains.
No, not at all.
He describes it almost like dancing. You practice your steps, pivoting, turning, retreating, facing imaginary opponents in your own fantasy world. And my absolute favorite detail from this entire deep dive, his chosen soundtrack for this combat footwork training is reggae music.
Which, I mean, it seems like a wild juxtaposition at first glance, right?
Oh, totally.
Pairing an inherently violent combat sport with the most relaxed music genre on the planet.
But when he explains the structure of the music, it makes perfect sense. Reggae is built on a very strict 44-time signature. It provides this hypnotic, steady, metronomic rhythm. It's the exact cadence required for elite boxing footwork.
Exactly.
You aren't rushing, you aren't panicking, you're just flowing within the measure of the beat.
You are cultivating a physical rhythm, because once you have that rhythm, once your feet can effortlessly put you in the exact right place at the exact right time, then you can begin to apply the complex geometry of close quarters combat.
And this is where the notes get incredibly technical. Let's say you have the rhythm, you've closed the distance, but the opponent has a tight guard. How do you get around it? This brings us to the architecture of hooks and uppercuts.
Let's examine the hook first. The nomenclature is literal. It is designed to travel around a corner.
Right.
specifically around the corner of the opponent's forearms. Because it must go around an obstacle, the arm can never be totally straight. The elbow must always be bent. Arnaud breaks this down to 3 specific distances, starting with the 75% distance.
Okay, so if a full extension straight jab is 100% of your reach, you just step in a bit. The long hook operates at 75%.
Yes. At this range, your elbow is bent at an angle of roughly 120 to 140 degrees. And critically, modern coaches will tell you the fist must be held horizontally, thumb pointing toward your own chest.
But this wasn't always the case, right? Arnaud includes this brilliant historical nugget. Historically, that long hook was often thrown with the thumb pointing straight up, just like that old English jab.
That's right.
But if we try that today, it's a recipe for a broken wrist. So what changed?
The physiology of the people throwing the punch. Go back to those manual laborers we talked about. We're talking about men with forearms and stabilizing ligaments made of dense, heavily calloused muscle from years of hauling cargo. They could throw a thumb-up hook at a wide 130-degree angle, and their wrists could absorb the sheer lateral force of the impact without buckling.
But the average person taking a boxing class today is an office worker.
Exactly.
We sit at desks, we type on keyboards. We simply do not have the wrist strength of a 1920s dock worker. So the modern rule is to keep the fist horizontal at that range. It structurally minimizes the risk of the wrist bending sideways and tearing ligaments.
It's a perfect example of how technique must adapt to the modern practitioner. But let's take that a step further. What happens when you move closer to the opponent, to what Arnaud calls the 50% distance?
Okay, so at half your maximum reach, the elbow tightens up. It's now bent at a perfect 90-degree angle. And here's the twist. Arnaud says at 50%, you actually can go back to the thumb-up position safely, even if you're a modern office worker.
Yeah.
Why does the physics change so dramatically just by stepping in a foot?
Think of your forearm like a concrete load-bearing pillar in a building.
Okay.
If a heavy roof rests perfectly flat on top of it at a perfect 90-degree angle, that pillar can hold thousands of pounds. The weight transfers straight down into the foundation.
Makes sense.
But if that pillar is tilted, the weight shears it sideways and it collapses. At a perfect 90-degree angle with the thumb up, your hand sits directly on top of the forearm bones. Upon impact, the force transfers straight down the bone structure. It's architecturally sound.
Wow. Okay, so what happens when things get claustrophobic? Your opponent crowds you. The 50% hook is completely jammed because you literally don't have the space to swing your arm horizontally. You're trapped.
So you change the geometry again. You move to the 25% distance, the short hook. You pull the elbow in tight, dropping it about 45 degrees away from your ribs.
And Arnaud's visual for this is wild. Your fist is completely straight on the wrist, absolutely zero bend, and you strike diagonally upward.
Right.
When you land it, you should literally be looking right into your own palm. He cites Mike Tyson as someone who utilized this perfectly. Because you're so close, the arm barely moves. You drive all the force explosively from your legs.
Which naturally brings us to the other weapon in that exact same phone booth distance, the uppercut.
Oh, yeah?
At 25% range, the biomechanical setup for a true hard uppercut must be flawless. Your elbow is tucked completely straight down, directly under the fist. It creates a perfect vertical line from the floor to the target.
And again, the power doesn't come from swinging your arm up like a, cartoon character winding up a pitch.
No, definitely not. The arm is merely the delivery mechanism. The engine is the upward drive of the legs. Your palm is facing you, thumb to the side. And this detail is vital. You must ensure the strike lands exclusively with the knuckles of your index and middle fingers.
Because if you hit with the pinky knuckles,
the force bypasses the main forearm bones and shears the wrist sideways. The structure of those top 2 knuckles aligns directly with the radius and ulna bones to safely deliver that massive upward kinetic energy.
Okay, what if the opponent survives that and steps back a pace? We're now at the 50% distance. The vertical line is gone.
So you adjust the trajectory. You can no longer drive straight up, so you rotate the hand. You point the thumb toward yourself. Instead of a vertical strike, it becomes a diagonal upward launch. You use the legs to push the fist forward and up into the target simultaneously.
And finally, the long uppercut at 60 to 70% distance. It's a long, sweeping diagonal strike from the outside. Arnaud is very clear here. The chance of actually scoring a knockout with this punch is minimal. You just don't have the mechanical leverage.
No, you don't.
So why even throw it?
Because it is incredibly disruptive. A long diagonal strike coming from underneath the eye line is notoriously difficult to track visually. It snakes right up the middle, splitting the guard, lifting the opponent's chin, and completely breaking their defensive posture.
I
It
see.
isn't the finishing blow, it's the key that unlocks the door for your next combination.
So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive talking about a guy in a gym claiming boxing is just 8 simple punches. But unpacking Arnaud van der Veer's notes, it is so obvious that this sport is a living, breathing, endlessly complex biomechanical science.
It truly is.
Every single punch, every shift of the wrist is dictated by a century of history, the literal day jobs of the people throwing them, the shifting demands of the crowd, and the strict, unforgiving laws of geometry.
It is physical chess played at high velocity, and I think it leaves us with a lingering question worth chewing on, honestly. Think about your favorite sports today, whatever they might be.